So last time on the channel, we talked about what happens when people are buried too soon. Women laid to rest in wedding gowns, some still breathing, some never getting the chance to say I do. But what about the opposite? What happens when someone dies and they never get buried at all? Well, this is the story of Elmer McCurdy, a failed outlaw, a wandering corpse. Tonight, we're telling the story of the most well-traveled corpse in American history. And trust me, it's not what you think. So let's get into it. Before he became a sideshow attraction, Elmer McCurdy was just a guy who was just really bad at crime. He was born in 1880, and he bounced around from job to job. He was a miner, he was a plumber, he was even a soldier. He drank a lot, got fired, even more. And eventually he decided that maybe armed robbery was more his speed. It wasn't. In October of 1911, he and a few other guys tried to rob a train in Oklahoma. They thought it was carrying $4,000 in cash, which amounts to approximately $116,000 today. What they didn't know was that they were robbing the wrong train. The safe they blew open, it had nothing in it but a few jugs of whiskey. Elmer, being the kind of guy he was, he took that whiskey and he ran. He holed up in a barn, got drunk, and waited. Not exactly criminal mastermind behavior. Law enforcement tracked him down, and after a brief shootout, Elmer was shot and killed on the spot. And honestly, that should have been the end of his story. But Elmer's real journey was just beginning. With no family to claim him, Elmer's body was taken to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And the undertaker, he saw a business opportunity. Instead of burying Elmer, he embalmed him using an arsenic-based preservative, something used at the time for unclaimed bodies. It worked almost too well. Elmer's corpse became stiff, leathery, and eerily lifelike. The guy literally stood him up in the corner of the mortuary and started charging people to see him. Visitors paid a nickel to look at the bandit who wouldn't give up. They dropped coins in Elmer's open mouth or his pockets as payment. And he stood there for years, dressed in a suit propped with a rifle, silently attracting more attention and death than he ever got in life. Now, this wasn't exactly normal, even for the Wild Wild West. But it worked. People came from all over just to get a glimpse of the dead outlaw. And then one day, 5 years later, two men walked in claiming to be Elmer's long-lost brothers. They said they wanted to give him a proper burial. So, the undertaker handed the body over. Except those men weren't Elmer's brothers. They were carnival promoters. And they had big plans for Elmer. So they just acquired a corpse for free. It was the perfect freak show prop. A real dead man, already mummified. He was already dressed up and he was already infamous. From there, Elmer McCurdy hit the road. For decades, his body was bought, sold, rented, and displayed. He was a sideshow attraction labeled everything from the embalmed bandit to the 1,000-year-old man. At one point, he was promoted as a petrified corpse found in the California desert. Another time, he was just a silent extra in a wax museum. His skin turned darker, his joints locked up, and his face began to sink in. But nobody cared. They just slapped a new name on him, repainted his features, and stuck him under some creepy lighting. He moved from storefronts to amusement parks, from the back of trucks to haunted houses. He was nailed to walls, dangled from nooses, tucked in glass coffins. Kids threw popcorn at him. People posed for photos beside him. Not a single soul questioned whether he was real, because by now, even the people displaying him didn't even know. The sad thing is, Elmer wasn't Elmer anymore. He was just this thing put on display. And that's how he ended up forgotten in the back of a dilapidated funhouse, hanging from the rafters like some broken Halloween decoration. Until one day, someone touched him, and his arm snapped clear off. Okay, it's December 1976, Long Beach, California, at a run-down amusement park called The Pipe. A film crew arrives to shoot an episode of The $6 Million Man. They're setting up inside the funhouse, a grimy, low-rent attraction called Laugh in the Dark. Dusty props, fading neon paint, animatronics that haven't seen the light of day in years. And hanging from the ceiling, literally dangling from a noose, was a figure the crew assumed was just part of the decor. A stiff, pale orange body in a tattered Western outfit, plastic-looking skin, and a dead-eyed stare. Creepy? Sure, but expected. Until someone tried to reposition him. A crew member reached out, grabbed the arm, and it broke off. And it wasn't like plastic, it was more like brittle bone, because inside were actual human remains, dried flesh, and the unmistakable smell of decay. The funhouse wasn't using props, they were using a corpse. Elmer McCurdy had been dead for 65 years, but somehow his journey led him here, swinging in the dark and waiting for someone to realize the horrifying truth. He was real. Obviously, police were then called and forensics were brought in. It took weeks of investigation. Dental records, the location of a bullet wound, the strange chemical cocktail in his tissue. But eventually, they confirmed it. The hanged man in the funhouse was an outlaw who died in 1911. And he had been on display ever since. After the discovery, Elmer's story exploded across national news. Everyone was asking the same questions. How does a real human body end up in a funhouse for decades without anyone noticing? The answer? A mix of bad record keeping, carnival culture, and a complete disregard for human life. Once authorities confirmed Elmer's identity, they reached out to the state of Oklahoma, and in April 1977, 66 years later after he died, Elmer McCurdy was finally laid to rest. But even then, they didn't take any chances. Fearing that someone might try to dig him up again, the funeral staff poured concrete over the coffin. They encased it in a vault so thick it would take industrial equipment to break through. A little ironic, right? The man who spent decades above ground on display, being touched and laughed at by strangers, now, finally protected, sealed away. And yet, that final resting place, it became a tourist attraction. People wanted to see the grave of the outlaw turned mummy, the man who wouldn't stay dead, the corpse who toured America. Even in death, Elmer had become entertainment. He didn't get peace, he got fame. Elmer McCurdy never got what he wanted in life. He wanted to be a legend, a Wild West outlaw, feared and remembered. But he wasn't good at crime and he wasn't feared. He wasn't remembered. Until he was dead. I'm not saying Elmer was a good man, but he was still a man. And for over 60 years, no one cared. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real horror. Thank you so much for watching. This is Danny Dreadful reminding you that every story holds a hint of truth or a shadow of a legend. Be sure to subscribe for more eerie tales and legends.